All right, folks, and we're back, ready to get going with another talk in Wagtail space. I'm more than thrilled to introduce one of our speakers from University of Pennsylvania today. Kara Gulrup is the Senior Web Accessibility Analyst here at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's going to talk to us about accessibility for complex components and interfaces.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Kara Gulrup. I'm the Senior Web Accessibility Analyst here at UPenn. Some of the things that I do in my role is I evaluate all of our different types of websites and web applications for accessibility. A lot of times I also hop into remediation work, and I also work directly with our vendors to evaluate both their tools and services that they may be supplying, or to review any documents that they may send over, things like VPATs, in order to ensure that anything that we buy is accessible. This is all a really kind of long way of saying that I spend a lot of time looking at how code is implemented. This is on websites and applications, pretty much anything that we put out on the internet here at the University of Pennsylvania. I have to make sure it's accessible to all different types of users. When we start thinking about more of these more complex interfaces, so less like brochure sites, right? Like if I'm just spinning up a marketing site, those are more static pages, not as dynamic content, But when we start looking at, let's say, process or a workflow for, how does a student add or drop a class? How does somebody go in and update their financial information? What do our HR systems look like? These are now asking a lot more of a user, both to, input information, get information out of it, but also a lot of times that content is changing dynamically. So anytime that we are working with those types of interfaces, we need to make sure that we're paying extra attention for accessibility for this type of advanced functionality. One of the main reasons for that is because it is incredibly hard to remediate some of these types of interfaces once they've already launched. When we get a ticket saying, hey, a screen reader user wasn't able to complete this whole process, if we've never taken accessibility into consideration for that, that can be very time intensive and it can be really expensive to remediate. So before kind of going into the specifics of these complex components, I want to give kind of a very high level overview of how assistive technology works in case you are unaware. So some screen reader fast facts. The most popular, if you are on desktop, most screen reader users are going to be using a Windows-based screen reader. So that's going to be your like NVDA or your JAWS. About 78% of screen reader users will be using those tools. Now, however, if you're on a mobile device, chances are you're going to be using VoiceOver, which is iOS's or Apple's screen reader, and that's 91% of screen reader users on the mobile device. Screen readers are also highly customizable, and there are two main settings that a screen reader user is likely to change. The first one is going to be verbosity. So that is basically how much speech feedback that user needs. And this kind of mostly depends on the severity of your visual impairment. So as an example, if you have partial sight or dyslexia, you may have your verbosity settings turned all the way down, because you only really need it for the content that's on the page, because you still have some sight, so you can see if things are buttons or not. But on the other hand, if you are, let's say, fully blind or have a more severe visual impairment, you're likely to have those verbosity levels turned all the way up. So that way you can get all the additional descriptions and metadata from those elements. So if, for example, if I'm going through a table, if my verbosity settings are turned all the way down low, I'm probably not going to hear, the column or the header name being repeated. But if I have those, that setting turned up, I'm going to hear a lot more information. The second setting that screen reader users are likely to change is the reading speed. So in English, your typical reading speed is going to be around like 120 to 150 words per minute. But advanced screen reader users can listen to words up to sometimes 450 words per minute. So that is incredibly, incredibly fast. There's also a myth out there that screen reader users have JavaScript disabled, so you can't add, dynamically add things via JavaScript, but that's no longer true. Almost 100% of screen reader users will have JavaScript enabled. I have some resources on this slide. At the end of this presentation, I'll have a QR code and a link to get these slides so you can have these resources. But I'm always going to at least these top two sites under resources. The first one is the WebAIM Screen Reader Survey. So WebAIM is a subset of the W3C. And they, every other year, they put out a screen reader survey. So things about what are the most popular screen readers, what are some preferences screen reader users have, and then also really importantly is what types of combinations between screen readers and browsers do typical users use. The second one is caniuse.com. So this will be if you put in different HTML or CSS, attributes or roles into Can I Use, it'll pull up a nice little graph of, any type of known issues that are out there. So you'll be able to see, it's like, all right, well, let's say I want to, add this attribute to my custom element. Well, it turns out, that does not, the latest version of Firefox doesn't support it. So this is also a good way to kind of validate, what type of accessibility support your code may have. The third one is PowerMapper. They do a decent amount of screen reader tests. I do not recommend, anybody who is not familiar or doesn't rather, it's good to know how screen readers work, but you should not learn how to use a screen reader just for testing because the way that you use a screen reader may be different than, or is likely to be different than somebody who actually uses it every day. There's a very steep learning curve. So this website, PowerMapper, has a bunch of screen reader tests where it'll show you the different types of support for code implementation and what is likely to be read out loud by screen readers at their factory default settings. So a quick relationship overview of how code on a page gets to a screen reader. You have your HTML, so these are going to be your button tags, paragraph tags, headings like that. The DOM represents that structure dynamically, and then the accessibility tree basically captures all of the accessibility information from that DOM and pushes it out to an accessibility API. Accessibility API is browsers have them, your operating systems have them, but it's basically just a way to let the information that's on a web page and assistive technology interact with each other. So once an assistive technology gets all of that information exposed to it, it can then interact with that website. So now we're going to go into some challenges of complex components and interfaces. So again, websites, static content, in sets of pages, usually limited sets of controls and interactions, more of a one-way information exchange. Web applications, more dynamic content, wide range of functionality, and it's highly interactive. And this is mostly where we're going to be focusing on today. So first challenge, HTML alone does not convey enough information to assistive tech about advanced UI controls. Using native HTML and semantic HTML, you get so much accessibility for free. But when we do have more of these, dynamic interactions, just HTML alone isn't going to be able to cut it. So we have what's called WAI-ARIA. So WAI-ARIA stands for Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. This extends HTML. So it's designed for these kind of complex web applications and provides the different types of techniques and best practices to make these very complex or intricate web components usable to all users. So for different types of content structures, we can apply ARIA roles. So this will be things like dialogues, alerts, accordions, and tabs. We do have roles for them. It could also be for complex form elements, so list boxes or combo boxes. But then, and also for more of application-based systems. So things like your toolbars, menu systems, tooltips. And this is something that goes right onto the HTML. So if you're ever dug around in code and you see a attribute that's prefixed with ARIA, that's what we're talking about here. Basically, what ARIA does, it defines like three things. Role, what type of thing is this? So when I come across something like, is it is it a button? Is it a tab? What is this thing? The second one is, what state is this thing in? So is it disabled? Does that keyboard focus? And then properties. What other information is crucial for a screen reader, or other assistive technology user to know? And so this could be, does it have a live region, or does it have relationships to other elements? One of the common ARIA attributes would be like ARIA labeled by, where it's referencing a different element to give additional information about what's happening inside of these components. So the first rule of ARIA is never use it if you don't have to. And the reason for that is, again, because we get so much accessibility for free when we just use native HTML components. So for instance, let's say I have this, I want to make a button. Well, if I have a span, I can technically add role of button, but then, I have to add a tab index, then probably have to add some JavaScript for, handling different types of functionality. And then because I'm putting a role of button on a span, a lot is probably not going to get all of that nice browser default CSS for my focus states. So I'm probably going to have to do some, CSS or SAS to make sure that those styles are available. Or I could just use a button. So when you are looking at like, okay, how do I build this thing? I highly recommend, going to Moz Docs, seeing what different types of patterns are already out there. Chances are there is an element. I think we have over 100 HTML elements, but there is likely something out there for you to use, and you don't have to go in and add all this JavaScript and CSS just because you want your custom button. Challenge number two with complex interfaces is that assistive technologies may not be aware of content that has been updated after that initial page has loaded. So that follows up with our rule number two: always use ARIA if you have to, because sometimes there's like no other way around that, especially if you're on a page that's using, AJAX, so it doesn't trigger that page reload. We'll want to use something that's called an ARIA live region to make sure that a user gets updated to any of that types of change of content or context that's happened on that page. ARIA live regions have three values. First one is off, which says that I only give updates if I'm currently interacting with the component. There's also a polite setting, so give an update after I'm done interacting with any element. And then assertive, interrupt me and give me these updates immediately. So you can think of, polite as, hey, your kitchen timer is about to go off, in about a minute and a half. And assertive is, your kitchen is on fire, get in here now. It's kind of a good way to think about that. This content can be updated via JavaScript, so it's not uncommon to have a little div somewhere on your page that says ARIA live region, and then the content that goes into there is updated via JavaScript. And some roles act as a live region by default. I won't go into these in detail just because of time commitments, but there are certain types of roles that will inherently come with this ARIA live property. So this type of stuff is, think how important it is for somebody is, let's say, filling out a page or filling out a form. If they don't do that correctly, what types of alerts do we have in there? Do those alerts tell me, what exactly went wrong? Does those alerts tell me how I can fix it? Or do I just hit submit and a blank screen stays there and I don't hear anything, which is a very frustrating experience. And then rule number three of ARIA: if you have to use ARIA, you have to use it right. Not using it correctly will actually make everything way worse. If you go to the screen reader survey that I had mentioned before, if you use ARIA on a web page, the likelihood of having other ARIA errors get flagged just kind of like skyrockets. And a lot of that is due to misusing it. So some ARIA attributes will have child dependencies. So if you do have, if you put ARIA on one thing and then not on those child elements, you're going to get some issues there because it hasn't been implemented correct. And then probably the biggest challenge of them all is, we heavily rely on third-party software, libraries, and frameworks to build these complex interfaces. So I have some advice for you folks when you're going out there and evaluating different types of frameworks or libraries to pull into your projects. You have to ask yourself, well, what accessibility features does it already have? Does it, do I know that it supports screen readers? Do I know that it's been tested with a keyboard? Has the vendor sent over anything, telling me that it is accessible or isn't accessible? And there are some areas where, and I've reviewed documentation from vendors before, I won't name names, but a popular quizzing software where they say, hey, if you're going to be using this, you can use these types of quizzes, but stay away from this component because, we know that screen reader users can't interact with this. So some of those settings, or some of those considerations may only be, in the documentation the vendor provides, but it's good to know what is and isn't accessible before bringing it into your project. And in some cases, you have to enable settings in order to better support some users with disabilities. For example, HighCharts is a data visualization library, and if you want to provide the raw data for a screen reader user, that's a setting that you have to enable. So it's also good to dig through again any type of documentation that you can find to see if there's anything that you need to do on the admin side to better support your users with disabilities. And then if you're doing something work for more of an open source, package, take a look at the issue queue. It's very common for me to, especially in like different types of like slider or carousel libraries, go to their GitHub repo and, type in screen reader, keyboard, accessibility, and just to see what pops up. It's also a good way to see too. It's like, well, has somebody reported this issue, let's say like 4 years ago, and it hasn't gotten any activity since then, so kind of like a good way to gauge the how accessible a library may be. And some of these, services, they may also provide a demo page too of like how these components may render on the front end. So if they do provide one of those, I recommend checking it out, running the Wave browser extension, and keyboard testing just to see what happens. Data visualizations do present a really interesting problem because we're using these we use data visualizations to make complex information way easier to understand. But since they are inherently ocular centric in nature, and that is a relatively new term for me, visualizations can make just getting that data really impossible for assistive technology users. So some of the things that we can to better support these users is make sure that it is keyboard users are able to get through this, especially if, let's say, we have a data visualization that allows somebody to like navigate through a chart, pop open tooltips to get more information, go through it with the keyboard. Can I do everything with the keyboard that I can do with the mouse? That's always a really good first place to start. And if it doesn't work with a keyboard, I don't even bother testing it with a screen reader, because a lot of the way keyboards work and the way screen readers work, there's a lot of overlap. So if I can't, toggle something with my keyboard, the likelihood of it, toggling with my screen reader is really, really low. The next is evaluate screen reader verbosity. So this is a good one too, to make sure that you're not just like putting in, let's say, an ARIA live region on your entire table, because then any update that triggers in there will force a screen reader user to read that whole table again. So, see what is being read out loud. Where possible, I highly encourage testing with users who actually have a disability and use assistive technology in their everyday life. And then let's say, you have these data visualizations or you have this data table, and just whatever you're putting into it, just can't make it accessible. A fallback option is always providing that raw data, either in like a CSV file, or you can dump it out as just a regular table if you are more of the data visualization side. In the interest of time, I won't play this for you, but I highly recommend checking out this HighCharts demo, especially if you've never heard a screen reader user, go through data visualization before. But it'll give you a really good idea of, the types of things that screen reader users hear, and then also the different types of functionality or support that you may be able to, pull into your own websites to better support these users. So, and you can always go the extra mile too. There's been a recent trend in data visualization called the sonification of data, which will actually allow users to, hear changes in the data to better interpret different types of patterns. High Charts has a lot of great examples of this if you are a High Charts user, but also NASA has been using it for some of the in order to communicate different types of information coming out of their, it's really cool, like there are pictures of like galaxies and black holes and all of that type stuff. And this gives this gives users more context too for the information that they're interacting with. So you think about it, we don't want to look at just like rows and rows and rows of like, data in a table. We like these visualizations because they're fun, easier to understand. We should give that same type of enjoyment, to our users who have disabilities. So highly recommend checking out, the High Charts demos and NASA's sonification on their space images. So I am here for any questions. You're also able to get these slides, so you have all of the links in there by scanning that QR code or going to bit.ly/WSUS-A11Y. So if we have time, here to answer any questions that you folks may have. Sure.
You had mentioned a tool that lets you, maybe I misunderstood, but basically the idea was that once you set up your ARIA attributes, it was going to validate it or to test it. I guess one of the questions I have is that my team can follow best practices, but they don't need to know necessarily checking the boxes correct. How do they install that?
So there is on the Way ARIA website, they have a great area for the different types of patterns. So some of the way is just kind of comparing what the thing you're making is over to best practices. The second way that you could do it too is, depending on, the implementation, you might be able to just run the Wave browser extension. So if you have like a broken ARIA reference, those are the types of things that it can flag. So yeah, if you're misusing it and there are issues in that, Wave would likely be able to tell you. But if, like, let's say you're using, role/button instead of button, that's not something that, Wave is going to tell you about. So part of it is, going over your own code and maybe going and then referencing that to establish practices, seeing if everything's wrong. And then there may be some tests too that you can run either through Wave. AxeCore does a pretty good job at flagging things too. So I would say those are probably like kind of your two best bets there.
Sounds like it's still a field where having a human actually test is probably.
Yes, so if you're scared of the robots taking over, I highly recommend a career in accessibility, because there are some, especially too when when you are thinking about, so people are interacting with this stuff too, and when it comes to like accessibility and like AI, a lot of these coding tools, that are powered by AI, it's like trained off of like millions of millions of websites of inaccessible code, so like trillions of lines of inaccessible code. So yeah, we're very safe here in the accessibility profession from the robot hostile takeover. Question?
Yeah, so coming from the government space where accessibility is technically a legal requirement, we have some sort of following the letter of the law and the spirit issues. And one I'm particularly interested in is you were talking about data viz. This is going to be a really sad variant of the version you showed of how this could work. We tend to put a lot of data viz and it's just static images on some of our content. This is having a lot of reasons that we are sometimes just out of our control. Often the way we try to handle this is with alt text that I am never sure when too much detail is too much. And I'm curious what you have any thoughts about, like, what the kindest way is to present content like that to users. Understanding that they can't parse a long set of alternate text the way one can parse tabular data represented by data viz model.
Yeah, that's you are, unfortunately, you're not unique, in that situation. We have we kind of have the same problem too. And then a lot of times, we get the information, let's say, from a subject matter expert, but the person posting it online is not the subject matter expert. So then they're like, how do I write alternative text for, the erosion of beachfronts? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not the expert. So, in cases like that, kind of context is key. So for instance, if you're like putting out like a blog post and what is the intent of that image? Is it to give like an overall trend? Or is it important for them to have all of those data points? If it's more of like the spirit of the trend, that's a little bit easier. So you're like, X raised to, Y over, these amount of years or something like that. But when it is, let's say in the surrounding content, it's not like those data points aren't explained. And it's like the audience is, let's say, a research-based audience. That's when it gets a little bit trickier. So you can always do in your alt text, you can give the location of the longer description if you're able to get a longer description and put that data in some type of table. But it is a challenge, especially too, again, if you're not that subject matter expert and you have to write it. In regards to what kind of like balancing screen reader needs, I always say when it comes to alternative text, especially for anything that's graph related, put your most important point right at the front, because you're not guaranteed that somebody's going to even listen to your whole thing of alternative text. Screen reader users, they can just, they can skip to the next element. So if there's a huge takeaway that you need that user to get, make sure that it's in that kind of like first sentence or that first bit. And then the user can decide if they want more information or not from there. And there is and then it's also, there are, again, humans have preferences too. There are always going to be people who like more detail, and there are going to be more people who like to keep it a little bit more high level. So as long as, you're putting in what you want your takeaway to be, anything else can be, a benefit for those users to, do as they see fit with.
Any other questions? Got one from Josh.
Something that I have heard a bunch of times doing web dev for the last few years is that a lot of web development takes place on Mac or on Linux, and typically using on Mac at least the built-in voiceover screen reader. Most people who use assistive tech are going to be using Windows and Macs, because those are the options that have been around and stable for the longest. Is that still true? And if so, what kind of problems, like, have you seen that create a lot of problems? And what kind of things?
Yeah, so most desktop users, if they're going to be using a screen reader, they're going to be using some type of like Windows-based screen reader, and that flips for mobile, and I think it's just because Apple has way better assistive technology support for mobile devices than Android does. So there are one of the I linked to it earlier in the presentation, but there's a whole section about screen reader and like browser combinations, and it's really important to look at those types of statistics, because you don't want to do all of your testing on let's say a MacBook Pro using VoiceOver when 90% of your users are going to be like Chrome users on Windows based. So it kind of helps you prioritize where to focus your testing efforts. And then for a added level of fun too, for the front end developers in the room, remember what a nightmare it was to support Internet Explorer. So screen readers also have bugs in them, and sometimes they only have bugs with specific browser combinations. So that's where using that caniuse.com too is a good reference, because you might find that there's you might have to change the way something's coded, because of the browser, like the browser support for like a specific, element, attribute, CSS thing, whatever it is, like isn't just as supported enough. So yeah, it's I've seen issues that are, everything from like, hey, this works perfectly, in VoiceOver, but it doesn't work in VoiceOver in Chrome. And then in JAWS and Chrome, it's fine, but JAWS and Firefox, it doesn't. So it's but I say if you are going to be like testing anything, like, test it with factory defaults, or rather like, test it with your factory settings, and then go for like widest amount of coverage too. Like if, so again, use that like caniuse.com because it'll show you kind of the browser breakdowns between versions and, where the issue is, where it was resolved, things like that.
All right, anything else? One more over there.
I work for accessibility at a university library, and one of the big issues that we're kind of grappling with is that we have a lot of legacy content, of media, so documents, maps, images, audio, anything. I just wanted to ask if that's, something that you're also grappling with at Penn, and what's been your approach trying to bring legacy content into compliance?
Yes, always. So we definitely do have that same struggle. I would say kind of like the first thing that I always recommend to people is like, do like kind of content inventory, and because you have to, know how big the animal you're up against is. So, it's like, let's say like PDFs, if you know that that's going to be like your pain point. All right, what PDFs do we have on the site? That may not be an easy task, you said you're from like a library, but for when you were looking at this like legacy content, is there any of this stuff that we can just get rid of? Like this doesn't need to live anywhere online. It's, doesn't need to serve like a historical purpose or like, of a record. We can just get rid of it. And the next set is, all right, well, is this content something that can just live as an HTML page, or does it have to be a PDF? Because if it doesn't have to be a PDF, but it still needs to be online, let's just find a home for it on like a web page and turn it into HTML content. And then there are certain circumstances where like something absolutely has to live as a PDF and it has to stay like that. And then that's where you can focus like your PDF remediation efforts on. So it's like, first, can I delete it? If so, I'm deleting it. The second is, can I convert it? Then if I can, awesome. And if I can't, then I remediate a PDF. And then something that I always recommend too is if like, let's say you have a website that you just know has a lot of inaccessible content, somewhere on like every single page, or that's really easy to find, tell people like, hey, if you have issue, like it's called an accessibility statement. They even have accessibility statement generators online, but it provides information to users saying like, hey, we know that we have XYZ issues. If you come across these and you need this in a different format, here is who you contact. And that contact shouldn't be like info ad. It should be like, accessibility ad or like a named person. So it just doesn't get lost in an inbox. So, usually a combination of content inventory and purging, and then making sure users know who to contact if they come across that, horribly inaccessible PDF document we posted online 15 years ago, who to contact if they need it in a different format.
Good question from Mike Sullivan online.
Sure.
I want to know, when should I describe a logo in alt text?
When or how?
When?
So if it's like if it's in the header, I just have it named as like, home or my, or my button. But like, if you're talking about like the element order, I have it usually as my, I guess, second element, because everyone has skip links as their first focusable element on their web pages, correct? So so our logo would be usually the second item, if you're looking at the source order. Is that kind of what they were asking?
I think so.
Okay. Yes.
I'm just curious what remediating yeah looks like.
A nightmare, usually. It is my least favorite thing to do in accessibility is remediate PDFs. And the big reason for that is that the tooling to do so is not quite where it should be. And it gets a lot harder the more complex your layout is. So if you just have like your standard kind of, Times New Roman documents where we have some like headers, bullet lists, links, like something like that, that's not that's not a huge lift. You can usually get away with like auto tagging through Acrobat. That's, not a horrible experience. But when you start getting into more like kind of magazine layouts or like, reports where we have like columns and stuff, that can be a real nightmare, especially too, depending on like where that source document was. So because, every time we convert something, let's say a Word document, and then we convert it to a PDF, sometimes we just lose, things get lost in that, that export process. So you can't always fix things in the source file, but, and then you have to go into Acrobat and remediate it. But, if you do ever get into PDF remediation, you'll become best friends with tags, which is the like HTML equivalent in a PDF document structure. But yes, and that's why I say like, if you have to remediate a bunch of PDFs, if it doesn't have to live as a PDF, like don't, convert it to web content, because that way you can at least, if you have to make one fix, you can just like, fix it in your like HTML code, push it up, and then that template goes everywhere as opposed to doing it like on the document level, however many times. So.
Like they finally have gone quiet.
Thank you so much, Kara.
Yeah.